Greetings. Welcome to In Conversation with Trevor, brought to you by Heart and Soul Broadcasting Services. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. Today, I'm in conversation with Cris Chinaka, Editor-in-Chief and Executive Director of Zimfact. If you enjoy this conversation, remember to subscribe, to like, and to share. Let's get down to some work. Cris Chinaka, my brother, welcome to In Conversation with Trevor.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation, and thank you for giving us time to catch up and review our industry together.
Absolutely. I'm so looking forward to that, Cris. Cris, as I was doing the preparation, invariably I found myself realizing that you are a veteran that represents an amazing pedigree of journalists that this country has had. So just help me go through some of these names. Tonic Sakaika, Emilia Sitole Matarise, who is still with Reuters.
Yes.
She's in the UK now.
Yes.
Davison Maruziva, Desmond Kumbuka, Jeff Nyarota. Who am I leaving out?
John Gambanga. Charles Rukuni. You could include in that group Rocca Fadzuma Pimize.
Yes.
And many more.
Yeah.
Most of them dead.
Absolutely.
And it's a passing generation.
Sadly.
Yeah. I was in the first group of journalists trained after independence. So we're a group of journalists transitioning from Zimbabwe from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe. A very interesting transition, both in terms of the journalism and just relating the whole Zimbabwe story.
Tell me, when you look at that generation that you represent, looking at the transition from Rhodesia to Zimbabwe and the state of play as far as our profession is concerned right now, what goes through your mind?
I think what goes through my mind immediately is first what has become of that older generation and its contribution to journalism generally, and to media work in the region. What comes to my mind is also a very unique thing that's happening, particularly in Zimbabwe, which is ageism. That while the rest of the world space and time for their gray hairs and gray beards, in our case, there's sometimes almost a desperate attempt to get experienced hands of a very complex story, a difficult story. And I think that makes us fairly unique in the way in which we have not been able to accommodate this transition, this generational handover from one generation to the other, that you don't do it as you're getting in and shoveling out everyone else. When you look at the rest of the world on their major stories, they've a very interesting mix, and a mix of their experienced hands on that story. They are enterprising and energetic a generation coming in. You have about 3 generations. In our case, increasingly, you walk into any newsroom or look at any story and you see its treatment. You don't find that that mix, and its absence has a serious impact on the flavor and the treatment of that story. And I think we have a lot more to learn in terms of just structuring ourselves, relating ourselves to our story from some of the countries around the world which have dealt with bigger stories. You look at Western Europe, you look at Eastern Europe, you look at Asia, and you then come back and look at ourselves and you say, I have no explanation for it, but it's you asked, what do you feel?
Tell me, powerful what you're saying, Cris. So what is the storytelling lacking? You're talking about flavor. Is that all? What else is the storytelling lacking because of the absence of
context? Yeah, all stories are contextual, right? It's so our stories are largely now talking heads. So we quote people saying this. We don't put any background about where that's coming from, whether in terms of the positions they are taking on a particular issue or the issues that they may be dodging, because we have sometimes in our newsrooms or in our media sector, people who can't easily recall that background offhand. Which background do you have in terms of your gray hairs, your experienced hairs? And like I was saying, when you look at Western Europe, Asia, you look at Eastern Europe, you look at Latin America, they seem to have found a formula in which there's space for the energetic, space for the enterprising, but also space for your grounding experience,
wisdom.
Yes, yeah.
It's from what you're saying, and push me if I'm not getting it right. We're lacking, our storytelling right now is lacking depth, is lacking analysis, and is lacking a bit of insight, as it were. Is that am I right?
Yeah, I would summarize it like that. I have a 3H summary of what our story is. It's hyper-sensational. Sometimes the issues are presented in literally death and life context. It is hyper-partisan because our youngsters have come in a highly political environment, and they think that's what journalism is all about. It is also hyper-personalized in the sense that every story is stuck to a name and not to a program and not to a context. And that normally happens when you don't have in your newsrooms or in our newsrooms the sort of fellows who have the temperament for the long haul, the fellows who have been there, they've seen it, and kind of calming everyone and say,
we've been here before.
We've been here before, and we have a greater responsibility to the public rather than to the persons that we are dealing with on a day-to-day basis. Whether those persons are in our political spaces, whether those persons are in our economic spaces, whether those persons are in our social spaces, that the calling that journalism is as a public, as a vocation, beyond being paid for it, that we earn our living from it as a profession, that this as a vocation is a commitment to the greater public. And we must develop a temperament and an attitude that is able to relate to all the persons that we're identifying, but then marrying our commitment to the greater public. I think that you can only do with experience. And I've had been fortunate enough to have covered the Zimbabwe story at its most emotional, its most sensational. And the challenge always was not just on the person as a professional, but on the person in terms of your own attributes. What sort of temperament do you require? Do you need to develop? Do you need to check yourself against in order to cover a story in which everyone is seriously, emotionally invested in?
That says to me our profession has a leadership role.
It has, and it is that element where we are always asking, is media a fourth estate? And estates lead, right? In our case, I think there's sometimes been a dereliction of that leadership. We've surrendered our profession to other estates, right? If you look at the judiciary, they lead with a set of ethics and guidelines that guide them. You look at the executive, the commitment that they make initially to serving the larger public means they are making themselves accountable to the public. And the judiciary equally is not making itself accountable to another estate. We have, in the media, sometimes found ourselves subjugating ourselves to other estates. And I've been in spaces where I've been arguing that I think our aspiration for a fourth estate remains an aspiration for as long as we don't then get ourselves to say our commitment is to the larger public, and that all the other persons and personalities and that we deal with in terms of delivering our story is as a matter of profession, but that in terms of accountability, estates become accountable to the larger public. And
we are accountable to Zimbabwe.
That's what we should be.
We should be committed to Zimbabwe.
Yes, but you find sometimes our journalism answers to politicians, answers to sectorial interests, and that is not Zimbabwe. That is not Zimbabwe.
What's your responsibility and my responsibility in drawing us back to the heart of the matter?
Yeah, I think our collective responsibility in the media is one of reflection, a continuous reflection, a continuous retreating to finding the values that got us into these spaces. And then to saying, where are the gaps? How do we fill up those gaps? It's one reason I've stayed in the media space even beyond my official retirement. I think we all have a responsibility towards skills development, in mentoring, in motivating rather than demotivating. Sometimes when you look at our media products, they compete with politicians in demotivating the public from just finding that energy which you need to carry on as human beings. And I think we have that responsibility that the media, when it commits itself to covering not politicians, not sectorial interests, but the Zimbabwe story in its fullness.
Telling the whole story.
Yes. Then we are likely, in that we find our defense, because we have expanded our defense line. We must be defended by the public. Our role must be defended by the public, not sectorial interests.
Is it just demotivating or there's an element of incitement?
There is. That's why I was talking about the sensational. And some people get sensational. Sometimes it's an age thing. The things you, Trevor and I, would do in our
youthful exuberance.
Yes, we would all get involved at some stage. We get excited about little things, and then we calm, and then eventually we find kind of the right temperament to relate to the different elements. So when you look at the structure of our media today, and sometimes we have politicians complaining and say, these stories are not being covered. And say, your kids are covering the story, so don't...
Point at yourself.
Yes. You are the last ones to complain about how the story is. Do your part, and journalism will do its part. Yeah.
Cris, you've already spoken about, indicated you retired in 2015, but you're back because you have a responsibility. We're going to take a break here. When we come back, I want us to get into your 25 years at Reuters, the highlights of you being the chief correspondent for Zimbabwe for 20 years. What an amazing life you've had, Cris. So at home, please don't go away. Join us on the other side.
For me, that was a highlight in terms of how you are pacing yourself on that story. Because the danger is also getting married to that story and becoming part of that story.
Welcome back to our conversation with Cris Chinaka, Editor-in-Chief and Executive Director of Zimfact. Cris, you got me thinking there, particularly when the politicians say, these stories are not being covered. We turn around and say, no, but these are your children writing these stories. Two questions, Cris. So we're really being unfair by criticizing the young people who can't write stories properly. Because you and I have absconded. And secondly, what's the role of the politician who's asking the questions here? What's the role of the politicians in ensuring that we've got journalism that tells the entire story?
Okay. So I think the first is, let's look at us. What is our role? I think our role is helping and mentoring the youngsters rather than denouncing them and picking up on their skills gap. I think in the newsrooms that I was citing, the best case examples around the world is you will find in those newsrooms your gray hairs being the ones who anchor the stories. And therefore, they're bringing the context, they're mentoring the youngsters, they're not kicking out the youngsters. They're actually blooding the youngsters into the profession. I think that's our role. I think we should be encouraging some of those best systems, particularly in our mainstream industry. I know institutions around the world. If you don't mind, I could
Absolutely.
cite.
Let's have the conversation, Cris.
Reuters, BBC, AP, AFP, Bloomberg, Washington Post,
New York Times.
You find in those
newsrooms,
really fellows who kind of just sit back and anchoring the big stories, helping to push the stories in the manner, in the quality that they want to be identified with. And having the youngsters as the runners. And as they are running around, as they are looking at
they're getting the experience.
They are getting the experience and they're getting
So your gray-haired chaps, they are the sub-editors. They are the proofreaders. They are the section editors. They do rewriting.
Yeah, they are. And lately now, they're also involved in your fact-checking stuff, right? They're asking the difficult questions. There are walls here, there are walls there. I think we can and we should be experimenting with some of those. If they're working for for Europe and Latin America.
They should work for us.
They should work for
So
Africa.
what's the role of the state then? These politicians who point fingers at stories that are not being done properly.
Yeah, I think first is they should address themselves. There are serious trust issues around politicians globally. And I raise that question also when I get into political spaces and say, do you know, as politicians of public officials, you are the least trusted sources of information. But in our case, you become the major sources of information. So there are gaps already that are created by our media, focusing largely
on
politicians, on personalities who are the least trusted by the public, not just in Zimbabwe, but globally.
All politicians,
they have serious trust issues. And they have to work through the media to regain that trust. And you do so by allowing the media to then put your discussions, your statements to a test. And the test is if you say this is happening or we are doing this, I won't take your word for it.
I'm going to go and check.
I'll go on the ground to check. Because that's my responsibility. I have a responsibility to getting you accurately, but I also have a responsibility to balance that story by putting it against what's happening.
Somebody says this in a very dramatic way, that when a politician walks in the newsroom and says, it's 18 degrees outside, you say, okay, Mr. Politician, but I'm going to check outside and see if it's actually 18 degrees.
Yes.
That's the role of journalism.
Yes, and I actually go out with three. With
three thermometers.
In case I don't trust them. Yeah. They're made by men. Maybe there are fault lines in there, and I have three of them to cross-check with.
But we have, unfortunately, in our industry, and I'm not pointing fingers here, the tendency to say the minister said.
And that's
Mr. Opposition politician said.
Yeah. And that's the fault line that we have been riding on for so long, for which we are capable. I think we have a responsibility to report the Zimbabwe story beyond the talking heads.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The talking heads have said so much. Let's go on the ground and say what the others think about what they are saying. Let's test whether what they say they are doing is actually happening. And we have a responsibility as an estate to the larger public. Yes, to get you accurately, but to ensure that we are fair to the rest of the public by
establishing the facts.
By establishing the facts. Yeah.
Cris, you spent 25 years at Reuters, international news agency. 20 of those years as the chief correspondent for Zimbabwe. Talk to me, Cris, about, for you, the highlights of that season for you. It's a long season, 25 years. In a nutshell.
Okay.
What were the professional highlights for you?
Yeah. I think the professional highlights was just getting for me into media space in a transitional period, but then getting into the biggest news agents in the world, to have the privilege to work with the biggest news agents in the world on one of the world's top stories for a long time. Zimbabwe was riding as one of the top stories for almost 10 years. I think the last 10 years of mine. I left because I was exhausted by that story. And you know the experience. Burnout. Completely. I was nagged by the time I left. I retired. The highlights was having to deal with very skilled, colorful political operators, right? Having to see these fellows who have fought.
Shall we name them? Who stands out for you?
It's the whole class of the liberation movement, the leadership of that movement, from Joshua Nkomo to Robert Mugabe to Edgar Tekere to
Morrison Nyagumbo.
Yeah, you look at that class and you say to yourself, wow, God is a way sometimes of just giving you the right people at the right time, right? They knew their mission. We have many questions about some of the things they did and the way they operated. But when you sat back as a journalist and just looked at these people as personality, colorful, interesting, magnetic figures, who, if you were not careful, you were likely to
be dragged in.
Yes, because the whole charisma around them was. And for me, that was happening not just in Zimbabwe. You looked across in South Africa, and you look at that class, the Mandelas, the Thabo Mbeki, this whole generation, the Zumas, the
Desmond Tutu,
the Paulo Jordans,
Paulo Jordan.
Yeah, it's that whole class. You look into East, and you have Samora Machel. You look further north in the East, you have Nyerere. You have Kaunda in next door. You had Banda, briefly for that period. So I'm coming into that space, and we were Dos Santos in Angola, and all the rest. You had Swapo. You had these were the fighters for our liberation, whether we like it. We belong to their parties or we didn't. You couldn't but see and cover them as the liberators so far. So I'm coming in and that. But I'm also coming in a time where you have these people have come in from the bush, and they're trying to find their offices and trying to see how they can run the country. And I had the privilege of covering those difficulties, the difficulties of transition. For me, that was a highlight in terms of how you are pacing yourself on that story. Because the danger is also getting married to that story and becoming part of that story around.
That's important, Cris, to be always aware of the danger not to get involved in the story, but to cover the story.
Yeah. And for me, I always put the test in, I wanted people to remember my reports and sometimes not to know me. So I would get, so is this the Cris Chinaka? Say, yeah, that's me. That the story speaks for you rather than I becoming part of that story. There will be invariably moments, I think, involving some of you, my colleagues, would then get arrested. And so we pitching up and picketing and all of a sudden say, you picketing and covering the story at the same time. So, no, this is a union element. This is a difficult one for me because these are colleagues and all the rest. But yes, I think the difficulty even to this day is that we must, as much as possible, try tell the story without becoming part of that story.
Cris, we are blessed in that we have the front row seat. Okay. You and I, in terms of interacting with these politicians. I remember moments with Joshua Nkomo. What a man. Moments with Edson Zobo, one-to-one. Okay. Not the Edson Zobo that the public knows. Okay. Moments with conversation with Didmus Mtasa, conversations with Robert Mugabe. Any of those for you that you recall that stick out to you?
Yes, I do. Edson Zobo, colorful. I always, I think a journalist's gift for the court. You didn't have to struggle because he spoke in a colorful way. He's very expressive, demonstrative, and all the rest. And RGM himself, the Prime Minister, the President, Robert Mugabe, whether as a sit-down interviews or with on a podium, on a rally, he was always out for me. It's so we have people say your careers were built around Mugabe, wasn't it? I say because he was the man of the moment at the time. Joshua Nkomo, taking out his stick and kind of pointing at you young people, don't know what you are doing, and all the rest of it, but with a fatherly disposition.
I'll share the story with you. We covered a story when I was at the Financial Gazette, Development Trust of Zimbabwe. You remember it? And Joshua Nkomo, I think, was the chairman. Chairman. And I think we got something wrong.
Okay.
So on a Friday after the Financial Gazette is out, I get to my office and he's called my office directly, personally. Okay. And my PA says, the president, the vice president for you. And I take the phone and he says, Wena Ncube, I want you in my office right now, okay? And he puts the phone down. And after that, I say to my PA, which office is he in?
Okay.
But I had to quickly establish which office he was in and dash to his office. Found him in his office sitting with the Financial Gazette in front of him and say, what is this nonsense that you wrote here? What is this? I've spoken to your CEO, Rusike. I'm flying with you to go and see that you wrote nonsense.
Yeah. Interesting.
That was the man.
That was the man. I also have an incident. I think it was just about 97 with the whole land thing was starting to unfold, first with Shoshe and words at the end, all the rest. And we turn up at a State House, and and he's there with the president and the other fellow. And there's a team from the CFU which has come to see him, I think, talk about these things. It was going to be a closed meeting, and we were going to have to wait outside. And he says, as we coming, just easily getting out and say, you young fellows, do you understand the stories that you are writing? And he walked, kind of. For me, that left almost like a challenge.
Yeah.
That in that phrase, in that person,
you young people, do you understand the stories you're writing?
You are writing, yeah. I said he was challenging us in terms of media and journalism is a knowledge industry. So when we're not investing time in knowledge and getting to understand what we are doing, the people have a right to question. And I suspect that person must have been motivated by either something he had read, something he had seen about, and he saw in us a representative of a collective that's called media or journalism. And he was asking whether we knew what we were writing about.
Cris, I want to get into you then, before that, by the way, you were a senior political reporter at Ziana, another institution that produced an amazing pedigree of journalists. So at home, don't go away. When we come back, we're going to drill down Chris's time at Ziana and the colleagues that Ziana produced. So see you on the other side.
So we say it's in fact we fact check everyone except God.
Greetings. My name is Trevor Ncube, host of In Conversation with Trevor, Zimbabwe's most engaging conversational show. I go beyond the headlines and beyond the sensational. We've brought before your screens change makers from arts, business, and politics, and from the region. Please join our growing community of viewers. Subscribe, like, and share. Welcome back to our conversation with Cris Chinaka, Editor-in-Chief and Executive Director of Zimfact. So, Cris, prior to you joining Reuters, you were with Ziana, another institution which at the time produced an amazing pedigree of journalists. Let's talk briefly about that space. I mean, people like Henry Mradzikwa, Ndaba Nyoni, Faith Zaba. Who else do you remember from that space?
William Bango.
William Bango.
Nyarazi Chenje. Tasimunako.
Tasimunako, the late. May their souls rest in peace.
Michelle Hakata. Emilia Stole, Leonisa Mjoma,
Michelle Hakata.
yes, Vincent Chikwari, the colorful Vincent Chikwari. And at the time, I think one of the editors. Then you had Farai Munyuke. Farai Munyuke himself. And you had Kuromba Mnodawafa as one of the deputies. At the time, I think there was a general consensus that we, Zimbabwe, had got into a very small space, maybe some of the best journalists.
Absolutely.
Around. Yeah. And then Ziana was regarded as the best news agents on the continent. In fact, my transition from Ziana to Reuters is occasioned by a story that we go to cover in Angola. It was on the Angolan War, but it was in Zaire, now the DRC. And we beat the world news agencies on that story, which was the first meeting between Savimbi and Dos Santos. Right. And so we drew quite a lot of attention. And if you remember, at that time, Ziana copy was almost a must copy for embassies.
Everybody.
Yeah, for other agencies. And all
quality, reliable copy.
Yes. And
well written.
Well written. And lots of work went into it in terms of preparation, in terms of the knowledge. You never went into a story in which you didn't know anything about.
Tell me, what, in your view, what was the recipe for getting this kind of people? Ndabanyoni, Faith, Michelle Hakata, the Chikwaris, yourself. What was the recipe of getting it so right?
Yeah, I think first, for me, it almost like represented a football team, right? Whether you Arsenal or you Man City, and you have someone out there who is sitting out almost like a talent spotter, right? There was a deliberate, so very few people actually, as far as I remember, applied to join. They were headhunted, right? And whether it's Henry Muratsikwa or Munyuki himself or Kuromba, seemed like they had a method of going out to look for staff, and to retain that staff.
For a Zimbabwe, for a government agency, I mean, essentially.
Yes, and it was, and I look at that also with lots of pride, because then the way the agents covered even government stories, you wouldn't believe it. It was a government agency. Yeah, I think there was a larger commitment of what we were talking about, that the people needed to know this stuff. And that
the whole story. Without accountability to one state.
Yeah, and then challenging the government to explain its bit.
The political party to explain its bit.
Yeah, that responsibility did not lie with the agency or the journalists. That if you deploy yourself in that manner, you are going beyond your calling.
Briefly, what went wrong?
Yeah,
I know I'm putting you on the spot.
Yes,
but,
yeah.
I mean, what went wrong? I mean, this was such an amazing institution.
Yeah, so we again, transitions, right? So when you're going through political transitions and the politicians think, maybe we need to redirect this energy in that direction. I think that's what happened.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's what happened. The whole thrust over ownership, I think, eventually said, first let's redirect.
And avoiding telling the inconvenient stories.
Yeah, that's because when you look even on the stories, the way Ziana covered Parliament, for example, amazing. It was, even for the other agencies, they had to wait on that copy to then turn it around for everyone else. And to the men and woman who was involved in that, had lots of pride. You were proud to be part of a really great team. You had also people like Mike Overme from South Africa. You had Musomi Siso. There was Mike Hamilton.
Mike Hamilton.
And then we had briefly, I think for a time, Ron Golden. We had transitioned from.
What? I mean, those names, you take me back in time.
Yes,
Chris.
And that's Jane Soper and all the rest, and you had all these colleagues who had come from Zambia or Tanzania and all the rest, and just getting the team to work.
I think proof there, Chris, that with the right intentions, the skills are there to build quality Zimbabwean institutions, whether it's in the private sector or government.
Without doubt. There is, it's simply reorganizing. It's so I pick on people who watch football and say, I used to be a Zimbabwe Saints supporter. Then I go to a stage where, do I support a team or a club? A club. Right. And so I'm in and out. I support a team. I like the club, but I support a team. So the moments when I'm not supporting the team because it doesn't represent what I think it should represent.
I think you and I are the same, hey? I do that with Arsenal, I'm in and out. Chris, we have so much to talk about, and I want us to zero in on Zimfact, which is the work that you're doing right now. Within the context of we're living in a post-truth world, post-fact world, parallel facts and so forth. Talk to me now about what Zimfact does. How long have you been in this position, and what does Zimfact do?
So we'll be 6 years in March. We've had a fantastic 5 years. You established ourselves just on the eve of the 2018 elections, recognizing that during elections, that's when truth really is a victim of public officials and those who compete for office. And we learned also from colleagues who had established similar initiatives that's the trend globally, that during elections, that's when it's most ideal sometimes to get involved. And we got into that space with assistance, funding from SIDA and FOIO, the Swedes, and they were fantastic. And we've had funding also from the US Embassy, from USA, from GZI, from the German foundations, on
Konrad Adenauer Foundation, Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, and so forth.
Yeah, that's all right. And I'm saying this because part of the commitment of fact-checking is that we must be open
transparent.
That we must be open about who we are involved in. But happy to say that despite the funding, never received a call in my life from any of those to direct us on editorial decision. Happy it hasn't happened. Hope it will never happen, because we'll tell them exactly where to get off.
How do you do your fact-checking?
Yeah, so the fact-checking, the first is that, what do we fact-check? The first recognition to the public is that all public officials, we have a greater responsibility to the public. Their statements must be put to the test. So we say we fact-check information from public officials. That includes politicians, largely in our case, sometimes because their actions, their words have a greater impact on other people. So that's what we do. And we then say, when they've said, we say, is it accurate? That's first test. The second, is it truthful? Right. And that is where we have difficulties sometimes. And we have said the way to overcome these difficulties is that we shall say to ourselves, all mortals are capable of willful or sometimes mistakenly misinterpreting issues. So there's the will, and sometimes there's some by default. You end up kind of saying the same. So we say at Zimfact, we fact check everyone except God. Everyone, including our friends. And sometimes it freezes friendships for a while, and you resume when people realize, oh, you're just doing your work and all the rest. But so we fact check, we try fact check information to do with
You
government.
must be busy fact checking what politicians say at rallies, Cris.
Yes, and that's the most difficult thing, because what has happened with the media sector, you and I know, is that the democratization of the media sector by the digital technology and digital developments has also led to the deprofessionalization of the media sector. That you have more fellows who are not qualified to be, but because they have a democratic right to communicate. So we fact-checking both politicians, but also the general public, where we think that the information that they are putting in the public domain is not accurate, could actually be harmful to other people. And we have found that the WhatsApp platform in Zimbabwe is the major purveyor or platform in which people...
Please say that again loudly for those out there who get their content from WhatsApp.
Yes.
It's the most.
Yes, it's the most. And so we say we're always urging that before you post, pause before you post, because it's not necessarily true, because you can't vouch for it. You can't verify it. And therefore, be a more responsible Zimbabwean or a media consumer.
Are you having an impact?
We think so. During the last elections, so we set out and said, where is the false information, misinformation, disinformation? Where is it
coming
prevalent?
from? Yeah. And?
So we identified the usual suspects, the public officials contesting for political parties, for political posts. And we said, where are they pushing that information? WhatsApp. So we joined some of their WhatsApp groups, right, to try make an intervention there. So we would call out stuff where we think the information is going on so much, and then we would either confirm or debunk that information and say it's true or it's not true, and try push it out. The work we did during this last election, I think caught the attention of a lot of the international observer missions. We had commendations both from SADC and the...
Well done.
Yeah, and
well done.
EU.
But my question, Cris, is the public is responsible for pushing stuff onto WhatsApp.
Yes.
Does the public care for facts?
Yes, they do.
Or people care about things they like?
Yes. They care.
Emotions and beliefs, not facts. They will not allow facts to stand in the way of their beliefs and their emotions. Am I being too harsh?
No, you're being very correct. But that's exactly the reason why we need interventions from the media. And we are saying to ourselves, fact-checking organizations globally on their own can't fact-check everything that's going on. The media must go beyond journalism to then tackle out issues, even on issues they've not covered themselves. They say, this is false. You run this is false, this is true, particularly where it involves public health, public security, jobs. You know, we had a story about 2 years ago where a hospital woke up to find 200 people had turned up there because someone had put out a false advert on that there was jobs or nursing vacancies in Rwanda, right? Someone has come all the way from Gokwe and they've trooped to go to Rwanda. So we are also saying to ourselves, beyond intervening and trying to make a contribution around fact-checking issues to do with governance, there are serious issues because of demographics, young populations looking for jobs and opportunities, where false information is being spread in those areas and it affects them. We have a responsibility to ensure that we get the right information. Drug abuse, for example. What's the information? Where do you get help? We have had some of our best successes has been on public health issues, right? Where people you're serving information that you and I would know about, where are the vaccination centers, right? Because our media is busy chasing the talking heads. They've not saved.
They're busy chasing CCC and ZANU-PF.
Yes.
That's not Zimbabwe.
No, and unfortunately. And I think the media has to wake up to the call by Zimbabwe and not to a call by
political parties.
Yeah.
But although, Cris, I must go back to this point that I wish the public was more discerning as to what content they go for. I wish the public was not as gullible as they are.
Yeah.
Because you see, I mean, I had somebody the other day, I keep on quoting this a number of times. I had somebody saying, oh, I saw it on WhatsApp.
Yeah. Yes, unfortunately, that's the wish. I don't think we're ever going to get to that stage, particularly in areas where the wish kind of overtakes the reality, right? So the wish, anything that kind of confirms our own beliefs,
we share. Belief, not facts.
Yeah, no. So it becomes a matter of faith in terms of what information is being shared. But I think the greater responsibility for interventions is with all of us collectively in the media. First, to flag the issues. Secondly, to undertake media literacy training. And I think media organizations, including AMH, should be getting into schools as well and setting up just 15-minute chats with Catch Them Young, right? Even if they eventually get to share.
It's important. It's important.
Yeah.
Now, the job that you're doing is tough. It's going to be made tougher by generative artificial intelligence, by deep fakes. I mean, talk to me briefly about how you're going to be able to deal with that.
Yes, so we're also trying to hire a thief to chase the thief. So we actually at the moment working on using AI ourselves to try tackle AI because it's the only way. You need to get into the drug cartels in order to understand how they are working. So we need to get into AI and say what's the positives that they can do. So we are hoping before maybe by mid-year, we would have some elements of fact-checking being done
using AI.
Using AI for Zimfact. And we think we should pilot some of those, particularly in colleges and schools, because the technology use is higher in those areas. The appreciation of the dangers that they pose is probably a lot higher. But sometimes it does feel like an impossible job. Yeah.
But Cris, you're doing a great job. Well done, and keep on doing it. We have a responsibility. I mean, I'm as guilty as charged. We are as guilty as charged. We should do more. particularly to educate the public that WhatsApp is not a source of information,
No.
that they ought to be discerning in terms of what they read. Cris, you know I'm not going to let you go before I ask you to share at least 3 books that you've read with our book-loving audience out there. What 3 books have you read, Cris, that you'd want to share?
Yeah, so I read daily.
Yeah.
I read at least, I'm reading 3 books at any one time. There's a method around it. I'll be reading something around Zimbabwe or Africa or Southern Africa. I'll be reading something around media. I'll be reading something about the world. So I'll pick up on anything. And my interests cover a whole range of issues, partly because I do a lot of media training, and it covers all sorts of subjects.
Right.
And I feel challenged not to be a page ahead of the people that I'll be dealing with.
Right.
But one of the books that have, first about books, I always use. So I get
You have an amazing library at your home. So
yes.
We'll share the pictures of that beautiful library at home with a whole host of books there.
Okay, thanks. Thank you very much. So how do I get in? So I get into journalism first through a book publishing house.
Yes. Moto.
So we're based in Gweru.
Mambo Press.
Yes, and it's a book publisher. So I get into a media surrounded by books, and that has carried me through. And I meet friends along the way who are bookworms, and one of them I'd like to pay special tribute to is a friend called, he's late now, Edward Mamutse. Yeah, I've always had friends sometimes who are older than me because they've been to the war front, the war front of life, and they've more to share. And we developed a habit of every month would buy at least a book. In my case, a book and a record, a music record, now CDs or whatever. But monthly I would without. And I've built a huge collection for myself across subjects. But one of the books that I found really interesting is this book called The Aztec.
Gary Jennings, The Aztec.
Yeah.
A dazzling and hypnotic historical novel in the tradition of Shogun.
Yeah, but if you go, it's dealing with the Aztecs of the Latin America, Mexico, and all the rest. But it deals with all issues from governance to social relations to how civilizations rise and prosper and how civilizations die. And I've had a fascination with that. So that's one of the books I always recommend. It's a bit of a hard reading, but very enjoyable. The other book that I found and I recommend is The Fall of the Roman Empire. So it doesn't matter. In our case, we constantly referring to the Munumutapa Empire, which means there was a glorious past at some stage. Sometimes I'm wondering when I look at ourselves whether we are worthy inheritors of the Munumutapa Empire for what they are in terms of strength of character, commitment to public service, and a confidence about relations with other states, never cowards, warrior state, right from the start. And I'm always, and when you look at that whole period, so it's, one of the books I'm always looking at and going back to is the late Stan Mudenge's Munumutapa Empire. Yeah, it's it looks like a historical book, but for me it is a motivational book about who we were, but also what we can be today.
Wow.
The third book that I would sort of recommend, I think I'd actually written, I thought, is The Africans by Mazrui.
Yes, Ali Mazrui.
Ali Mazrui. I have friends who have arguments about how he was right wing and all the rest. I'm not trapped by
Isms.
No, unfortunately. But what I like is the confluence of systems and ideas and subjects that come. And I always recommending that. Again, for us as Africans and as people, when there's so much that there is to demotivate us, we need a lot of motivation to keep going. And I find in those 3 books a thread that runs through.
I see the thread.
Yeah, I see the thread.
I see the thread.
Yeah, so I do read across subjects.
Cris, wonderful books. What a career. And you're still going.
Yes, I hope.
Reuters has pulled you out. You're still doing some work for Reuters.
Yes, I am. I'm doing lots of training.
Yeah.
And latest focus at the moment is on covering illicit financial flows. So I'm doing training around the region on covering illicit financial flows. It's a subject that's dear to me because if we're able to keep some of those resources in Africa, we're able to prosper there for ourselves and argue over issues. Absolutely. So it's a pulling that I'm enjoying. Thanks,
Cris,
thanks
thank you so much for this opportunity.
Okay,
thank you very much. Yeah, like I said, you represent for me a pedigree of journalists that Zimbabwe had, and I think you've challenged us to go back and see how we can recreate that in the newsroom.
Yeah, so John Masuku is still standing.
Yeah,
he's always saying, we the last man standing. I said, no. We are the glue between generations.
Let's do the right thing.
Yeah.
By the generations that are coming. Cris, remain sitting there. Allow me now to tend to our viewers who are all over the world. Thank you so much for your support. Thank you for watching. Remember, we are a weekly show. We are out at 7 a.m. Central African Time on YouTube. To ensure that you don't miss out on any of these quality conversations, I invite you to subscribe. We've gone a step further, by the way, and created a website where all our content sits. And on that website sits our podcasts for your listening pleasure. Thank you for watching. Thank you for your support. Until next time, cheers to you all.